Missouri, a state in the heart of the U.S. with low cost of living, outdoor recreation, and a vibrant cultural scene. But something dark was happening in Lincoln County, in the rural areas bordering the Mississippi River in the state of Illinois. Multiple children would disappear within 50 miles of each other, their families still without answers decades later. And today, we're going to be speaking about two more of these children.
Still no answers.
9 years ago today.
What happened to these two young children?
Remains a mystery.
Urgent story unfolding right now. Who is missing? An unsolved murder.
"11-year-old Charles Arlin Leon Henderson, who went by Arlin, was born March 16th of 1980 to his parents, Deborah and Arthur, who were married in 1969 after a few years of dating. He also had a sister named Joy, who was 10 years old when he was born. Arlin is remembered as a fun-loving boy who enjoyed telling stories, swimming, diving, climbing trees, and riding bikes around the neighborhood with his friends. The kids even had a clearing near the woods that they called their clubhouse. His favorite subjects in school were social studies and science. In the early 1990s, Arlin and his family lived at the Fountain and Lake Trailer Park near Moscow Mills, Missouri, a town about 50 miles northwest of St. Louis. The trailer park was located in a rural area outside of Moscow Mills, near the unincorporated community of Eflin. Sadly, in 1990, his father Arthur would die of emphysema. After this, his sister Joy would get married and move out of the family home, leaving little Arlin and his mother living alone in the trailer park. Despite the loss, the family found solace in each other and their tight-knit neighborhood. Arlin spent his days riding his yellow and white Huffy bicycle around the trailer park and playing with neighborhood kids in their makeshift clubhouse near the woods. In the summer of 1991, Arlin had just graduated 5th grade and was looking forward to middle school. It was a warm summer evening on July 25th of 1991, and Arlin was doing just as he always did. He was riding his bike up and down the road near his home, looking for friends to play with. He begged his mother Deborah to save him a Polish sausage, which is what she was cooking for dinner. Arlin would last be seen around 5 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. that evening, as he rode his white and yellow bicycle up and down the neighborhood. But the hours would pass, and Arlin would never arrive home for dinner. Deborah would only realize that Arlin was missing after a neighborhood friend stopped by to hang out with him, leading to the authorities being called and a massive search of the area. Around 150 neighbors, law enforcement, and community members searched the neighbors' houses, woods, hills, and farmlands surrounding the area. And they would search well into the morning hours without any leads. And the next morning, the searches would continue. Investigators would say they couldn't list Arlin's disappearance as foul play, however, they also didn't believe that he left on his own accord. And as the community always did, they rallied behind Deborah and her family. An FBI agent overseeing the case would say, quote, "This is a very rural area with extensive heavy dense foliage, which makes searching very tedious, but the community here has been extremely helpful. I describe this as a very caring community." End quote. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, there was an article that stated that Arlin had last been seen riding his bike on Lincoln County Road 837, which, as you can see, is surrounded by fields. There's also some homes here, although I don't know if they were there back in the early 90s. Shortly after Arlin's disappearance, Deborah would receive a very concerning phone call demanding a ransom. When Deborah told the caller, "You've got my son, you've got my son," the caller would hang up, and after that, she would not receive any other phone calls or ransom requests. Within only 5 days, the FBI would become involved in the investigation. Agents from the Bureau would state that Arlin's disappearance was suspicious, but at that point, they still couldn't determine if he had been abducted or not. Search dogs would also be brought in, but there was no signs of Arlin anywhere. 3 months after Arlin disappeared, on October 10th of 1991, a farmer walking along County Road 685, also known as North Ethlin Road, was picking up aluminum cans when he came across a Huffy bicycle in the weeds about 15 feet off the road. This location was around 5 or so miles from Arlin's home. Reports state that it appeared to have been laying there for quite some time. The farmer would report the discovery to the police, and before long, the FBI would show up to collect the bicycle and investigate the scene, which did match the bike that Arlin was last seen riding. It would be taken for testing, and it was noted that at least one fingerprint was found. Although I haven't heard anything about this fingerprint after the fact, so I'm not sure if it was ever determined whose fingerprint it was. Let me know down below if you know. The following year, in 1992, Deborah would launch her own investigation and would turn her home into a call center. She set up her own tip line and took on the task of processing leads. She also made flyers and had a group of around 20 people helping her, calling themselves Friends of Arlin. She purchased Christmas presents for Arlin and refused to move in case Arlin tried to return home. She would even leave a note on her door every time she left that said, quote, "Arlin, we've gone to the store. Be back in a few minutes." End quote. In September of 1993, the FBI would offer a $10,000 reward, but despite this, no answers ever came. Then, on the evening of March 10th, 2000, Deborah was waiting for her now 29-year-old daughter Joy and her 3 children to come over. Joy was said to be in the process of separating from her husband Robert after he had threatened to kill her. While Deborah was waiting, the county sheriff would arrive at her door and inform her that her daughter, along with 3 of her friends, had been murdered. All 4 were shot inside of Joy's home, and her 3 children were miraculously unharmed, hiding in the basement during this incident. The following day, Robert would speak to the sheriff on the phone for around 6 hours. During this phone call, he stated that he killed Joy because he couldn't live without her, and he killed her friends because they were telling her to stay away from him. During this conversation, he was asked if he had anything to do with Arlin's disappearance, in which he said no. The call came to an end when Robert said he could not face his children, and he then took his own life. What a horrific situation. And that case is a prime example as to why it is extremely dangerous in the days leading up to a woman leaving her abusive husband. That man was extremely unhinged. The fact that he not only killed his wife, but then 3 of her friends because they were trying to help her leave him is just, it's astounding. And then he was such a coward that he went and took his own life after that because he couldn't face the music. But when I was researching this case, it really, really made my heart go out to Deborah. Not only did her husband die, but then her young son went missing, and then her daughter was murdered. My heart aches for her. I could not imagine. After Joy's murder, Deborah took on raising her 3 grandchildren and bought a home about 80 meters from where she used to live because she needed a larger home for the grandchildren, but she didn't want to go too far away in case Arlin came home. She also kept all the bills in Arlin's father's name and made sure to keep her phone number just in case Arlin tried to phone home. It wasn't until after Joy and Robert's deaths that authorities learned they had made some statements that indicated they may know something about Arlin's case, leaving those wondering if they died with that important information. Around a year later in 2001, a 23-year-old man named Joshua Spangler would confess to Arlin's murder, 10 years after he had disappeared. Joshua would have only been around 13 years old at the time of the alleged killing. He was apparently involved in drug activity in 1991 and was associated with George N. Gibson and his brother, Charles Chucky Gibson, claiming he sold drugs for them. Both of the Gibson brothers were initially charged in connection to Arlin's disappearance in the spring of 2001. Joshua Spangler would tell investigators that a member of Arlin's family owed Charles Gibson money, and so he ended up getting paid $10,000 to kill Arlin as a warning. Keep in mind, he was 13 years old. Joshua stated that he was riding in a truck with George on July 25th of 1991, the day Arlin vanished. They spotted him riding his bike, they abducted him, and then held him in a house in Davis, Missouri for a number of days. After this, he took Arlin to a creek bed and shot him in the head with a 9mm pistol on July 28th of that year, 3 days after he had been abducted. They then buried his body in a shallow grave beneath a home near the Mississippi River. Investigators would search the site of a burned-down home near Winfield, Missouri in the summer of 2001 for Arlin's remains. However, nothing was located. Due to Joshua being a minor at the time of the crime, he was allowed to plead guilty to first-degree murder and then walk free on the grounds that he would testify against the Gibson brothers, who were also being charged with first-degree murder. However, authorities would end up withdrawing their charges against the Gibson brothers in October of 2001, after learning that Joshua Spangler lied about their involvement in the crime. After citing numerous discrepancies in Joshua's account, they charged him with perjury with his testimony about Arlin's supposed death. He then pled guilty to perjury and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. At the time of his plea, he was already serving a 4-year prison sentence for unrelated charges of burglary and evidence tampering. Authorities now believe that Joshua Spangler and the Gibson brothers had nothing to do with Arlin's disappearance. They believe that he made up this story as a malicious joke to make the police department look incompetent. It would be in 2007 that investigators would begin looking into Michael J. Devlin, the same predator I spoke about in Scott Cleishuldy's disappearance that led me to both Arlin and then we're going to be talking about Bianca's case. Sean Hornbeck, a 15-year-old boy who disappeared at 11 years old in 2001, and William Ben Owenby, a 13-year-old boy who was abducted in 2007, were both found alive in Devlin's home in January of 2007. Ben had been missing for 5 days, and Sean over 4 years. Both boys had been held against their will by Devlin, who subsequently pled guilty to kidnapping and child molestation and was sentenced to life in prison. Authorities initially suspected that Devlin could be connected to multiple other missing children's cases, and so they formed a multi-jurisdictional task force to look into this. However, in October of 2007, that task force would dissolve. However, it does make me wonder if there was another predator lurking around, or could Arlin's brother-in-law have done something to him? It makes me wonder why there are these rumors that his sister and brother-in-law knew something. Arlin's mother still lives in the same trailer park where her son used to live, but in a different mobile home. Her husband's name is still listed on the phone books in case Arlin decides to call home. She has dedicated her life to trying to find her son.
Mother's desperate plea for answers. It's been 32 years since her 11-year-old son, Arlin Henderson, disappeared in Lincoln County. Now detectives have fresh eyes on this cold case. Justina Cornell spoke to the boy's mother, who says she won't give up.
This one, yeah, we had a few rewards. This is one of the first ones.
For 32 years.
Age progression is 3/6/2007.
It's been a search for her son. Debbie Henderson Griffith holds on to a missing persons flyer as she holds on to hope.
I mean, the family kept on. We never gave up.
In the summer of 1991, her then 11-year-old boy, Arlin Henderson, rode his bike near his home in Moscow Mills. He never returned home.
After that, Arlin's bike was found about 11 weeks later, 5 miles away from his home. And since then, there haven't been many clues.
Then after a while, I think everybody got tired.
Time has taken its toll.
I don't think I've had peace since they took him. I still go to bed, think about him, wake up, think about him, pray. That's my first prayer.
Within the last 2 years, it's a detective's determination that's reignited this case.
He gave us some hope.
Police say 9 years after Arlin's disappearance, his sister Joy Leonard was murdered by her husband Bob Leonard, who then killed himself. Now police plead for the public's input.
We've learned that they may have made some comments that may have been relevant to this investigation, but they're no longer with us, so we can't interview them. So the purpose of the media release was to find people who knew them.
A tip could be the tip of the iceberg.
Every little tiny bit might just bring him home, might just let me have peace. If he's dead, I would really like to know who did it and why.
Debbie yearns for any clue to find Arlin and answers. It's a mother's motive to move forward.
I haven't given up on Arlin, but I'm really ready to move on. I would like to still get to know my son if he's out there and he's alive. I'd like to know the man he became, but that's in God's hands now.
Yet to this day, there are still no answers as to what happened to little Arlin. Arlin is described as a white male with blonde hair and a crew-cut style and blue eyes, standing 4 foot 5 inches tall and weighing around 70 pounds at the time of his disappearance. Arlin was last seen wearing a camouflage print t-shirt, camouflage print pants with a tear in one knee, gray socks with red stripes, and black sneakers. He has a scar on his thigh and a gap between his teeth. He goes by one of his middle names, Arlin, and many accounts refer to him as Arlin Henderson. 13-year-old Bianca Noelle Piper was born December 26th of 1991 in Missouri to her mother Shannon Tanner and her father David. Bianca grew up in Troy, Missouri with her 2 older sisters, Amber and Tiffany. Shannon and David eventually divorced, the couple moving to different parts of Missouri. Shannon moved with her 3 children to Foley, Missouri, eventually moving in a boyfriend named Jim Felt. Foley is located northwest of St. Louis, near the Illinois border. David would meanwhile relocate to Fredericktown, Missouri. During her early childhood, Bianca was hospitalized due to suffering from ADHD and severe bipolar disorder, and had seen a therapist since the age of 4. Bianca required daily medications to prevent disorientation and hallucinations. She was an 8th grader at Winfield Middle School. and was placed in special education classes due to her short attention span and repeated absences. Her therapist had also recommended that her mother Shannon drive her a certain distance from home and have her walk back on her own, giving Bianca time to deal with her own aggression. From what has been detailed, Bianca suffered from attention deficit disorder, as well as hyperactivity disorder and severe bipolar disorder. She had mood swings, aggressive tendencies, periodic anxiety attacks, and difficulties with self-control as a result of her conditions. However, she often acted like a normal teenager, and it was sometimes difficult to tell that she was ill. Her teachers stating that she was artistically talented and had a deep love for horses, Barbies, and the color purple. On the evening of March 10, 2005, Bianca and her mother had a disagreement over her doing her chores. Pretty sure it was the dishes. Despite the snowy night, Shannon claims that Bianca had asked her to drop her a ways from home so that she could walk back as the therapist instructed them to do, which Bianca was finding helpful. However, this time, Shannon claims Bianca wanted her to drop her off farther from home. So at 6:15 p.m. that evening, Shannon dropped Bianca off about a mile from their home in the 1000 block of McIntosh Hill Road near a bridge. She gave her a flashlight and then drove back home. According to an interview in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Shannon stated she drove back to tell Bianca not to accept a ride from a stranger. She added, quote, "I wish now I told her I loved her," end quote. Bianca was last seen wearing a lime green blouse, a gray Adidas hoodie sweatshirt, blue jeans, and white tennis sneakers. Shannon claims that after Bianca didn't return home after 20 minutes, she drove back and started looking for her daughter. According to the Springfield News Leader, Shannon knocked on the doors of a few nearby homes asking if they'd seen her daughter. However, later, when Bianca still didn't return home, she reported her missing around 8:20 p.m. Shannon would later tell Fox News, quote, "I dropped her off and told her I'd see her in a few minutes. I went home and started cooking dinner. And then in 10 or 15 minutes, when she hadn't returned, we went looking for her, and she was gone without a trace," end quote. Now, I will say the time discrepancies kind of confuse me. We have a 20-minute wait, and then we have a 10 to 15-minute wait, but then it also makes me question if she was dropped a mile from home, could she walk home that fast, especially if she was just, taking her time, maybe stopping, processing her emotions. Would she come back that fast? I don't know, but the entire situation is very strange to me. I can understand the concept of letting someone walk it off. Like, a lot of people like to go if they're upset and just, take a breather. But to drop a child a mile away from home and then just peace out and leave them there to walk home alone, it's very sketchy. In my opinion, I don't think that was a good recommendation on the therapist's part. I think that's quite dangerous, as we are now seeing we have a missing child. But I guess at the same time, if we look at it, I'm sure they tried a lot of other things with her. She had a lot of mental health issues. And then at the same time, this was the early 2000s in a rural area. People were more trusting back then, especially in rural areas still. And she was 13. She wasn't like a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. She had just become a teenager. But due to this and some more information we're going to be speaking about, it led to a lot of speculation as to what may have actually happened. Authorities initially thought that Bianca may have gotten lost on her way home. Concerns would worsen after you add in that the temperatures were dipping below freezing. However, after an extensive search, the beliefs swayed more towards an abduction, especially since Bianca had no history of running away from home. Over 100 people would search for Bianca, along with police dogs and helicopters, covering a 270 square mile area. Both Shannon and her live-in boyfriend were said to pass polygraph tests. Her biological father also went through extensive interviewing. However, no one in her family is considered suspects. There is, however, a lot of speculation, and I read a lot of speculation from locals that there may be family involvement. But I'm saying right here, right now, according to what's out there, authorities do not believe there is. And that may be not because of all those other circumstances kind of seeming like red flags, but 2 months later in May, authorities would arrive at the Piper home due to a domestic dispute between Shannon and her live-in boyfriend, Jim. She would file a complaint against him, but then drop it after the two reconciled. Then, a month later in June, the authorities would once again arrive after another call from the Piper home. Authorities would report to have heard shouting upon entering, and found Shannon on top of her 17-year-old daughter, Tiffany, holding her face to the ground. 38-year-old Shannon would be charged with DV after hitting one of her daughters in the head with a curling iron and threatening to tie her up and lock her in a bedroom. According to Tiffany, her mother had snatched her curling iron from her, hit her with it, and repeatedly punched her in the head. While being taken out of the house by police, Shannon disclosed her daughter threw a glass dish at her. She then proceeded to shove an officer and reach for a broken piece of glass. Shannon then had to be tased by authorities. So things didn't seem to be all good in the Piper household. As I mentioned, in 2007, authorities would look into Michael J. Devlin, and they also looked at his possible connection to Bianca's disappearance. However, it seems like he is either ruled out or they don't suspect that he could be connected. But in the end, nothing came of it. Although I will say it seems like he had a thing for young boys. Bianca was a girl, so if anything, I would think maybe he'd be involved in Arlin and Scott's disappearances because he was so close to that area. That's why they also looked into Bianca being connected. In 2009, Bianca's father would pass away without any answers. Shannon would then move to St. Charles, Missouri. Later that year, her sister Tiffany would make a startling statement saying that Bianca was in the pond. Authorities were alerted, but their searches yielded no results. It remains unclear why Tiffany made that statement or if she possesses any knowledge about what happened to her younger sister. However, to pile on the red flags, in September of 2014, a now 24-year-old Tiffany was sentenced to 8 years in prison for trafficking 2 suburban high school girls in June of 2012. Tiffany said she placed ads online inviting men to have sex with teenage girls for a price. Fox 2 Now reported her sex trade business was elaborate and lucrative. According to prosecutors, Tiffany was initially a victim of human trafficking herself and then was continuing that on. After Bianca's disappearance, when Tiffany was around 15 years old, sex ads began popping up online for her. Which begs the question, how does a 15-year-old girl get trafficked? And no one knows. No one is apparently alerted to this. Authorities aren't called. No one is monitoring this. And then on top of that, her sister also is missing. What was going on in her life, in this family's life? How does one girl go missing and the other be sex trafficked and then go on to traffic other girls after that, repeating the cycle? How was this 15-year-old girl victimized, and then how did she learn to repeat that cycle? Tiffany would eventually speak to the media regarding her sister's disappearance, saying, quote, "Life does have to go on, but you think about it every day, things that she misses out on and things we wish to share with her. Whenever she was 16 and she could have drove, been in high school and gone to prom, had a boyfriend, started her own family, holidays, just everything that we take for granted in everyday life. The last thing I said to her was, 'Thanks a lot, I'm going to have to finish up your chores now.' And it seems silly, but still 13 years later, that's what I last said, instead of 'I love you.' Her niece Abby, she's going to be 9 in August. Every time she gets a wishbone and a piece of meat, or picks a dandelion, or gets to make a birthday wish, she wishes for her Aunt Bianca to come home." End quote. On February 3rd of 2023, the Lincoln County Sheriff would once again search the area where Bianca was last seen walking. According to the press release, the search is part of their new efforts to, quote, "review the investigative files of all cold cases and explore all potential opportunities to uncover new evidence and develop new leads," end quote. They have not released any found evidence during this search.
Nobody else can understand. Even your own family members can go through periods when they're not as understanding, but only someone who's missing or lost a child can understand.
For 14 years now, Shannon Tanner has wondered what happened to her daughter. She says on March 10th, 2005, 13-year-old Bianca Piper went for a walk. She was bipolar and started using that as a way to calm down.
I dropped her off, told her I'd see her in a few minutes, went home and started cooking dinner, and in 10 and 15 minutes she hadn't returned yet, so we went looking for her and she was gone without a trace.
She was last seen in a rural area of Foley, Missouri. She'd now be 27, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children think she may look similar to this. Now investigators are taking a new approach on the case.
Lincoln County has hired a detective to work full-time, as far as I'm aware, on Bianca's case, solely on Bianca's case. He started about Christmas time, and I am amazed at the work that he's done so far.
She encourages everyone to be on the lookout. If you see someone that looks like a person you've seen in a missing persons photo, or if they appear to be in a situation where they may need help, don't hesitate to call police.
So what if you're wrong if you end up being wrong? But what if you're right? You know, take that chance, because all the children out there that are missing deserve to be found. And I go back to Sean Hornbeck. When he was missing, there were people that thought he looked like the pictures they'd seen, but they were afraid to get involved. And look, it was him, and he could have been home a lot sooner with his family if somebody had said something a little sooner.
Tanner says she still hears from people that have seen Bianca's photo posted around town, and that makes her feel hopeful because that means they're looking.
Despite Bianca's case being considered as a cold case, it still remains open. It really makes you wonder, was this 13-year-old girl dropped off to walk home and was kidnapped? It's definitely plausible, or is there a lot more to this than we even know? A lot more that a lot of locals are speaking about online. Bianca is described as a Caucasian female with brown hair and brown eyes, standing 5'6" tall and weighing around 185 pounds at the time of her disappearance. Bianca's nickname is B, and some agencies refer to her as Bianca Tanner. She has scars on her arms and legs, and a scar on her abdomen. Her ears were pierced. Bianca may wear her hair in a ponytail. She was last seen wearing a lime green blouse, gray Adidas hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and white sneakers. She was also carrying a flashlight. What do you all think happened in these two cases? Let's have a conversation down below. My heart goes out to both of these families. I truly, truly hope little Arlin and Bianca can be brought home soon. It has been decades too long, and not only so that their families can get closure and they can get justice, but also so that the perpetrators in these crimes can be caught, because it may mean whoever is involved is still walking our streets. It may be a danger to other families and other children. I'll be in the comment section chatting with you all, and as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.